Alright, so if you're watching this video, some things that you may take, other developers may take for granted is that you know how to create a HTML page. But if you're getting started and you don't know, let's start from scratch. So I'll be using the text editor Visual Studio Code, which is a free text editor. You can download it off their website. All you have to do is Google Visual Studio Code. It'll be the first thing that comes up. And now that we have an empty project, what we want to do is we want to create a new file, and this will just be our index.html. That HTML there means it's an HTML file, and the browser and your text editor will know how to treat it. You're going to have some standard items when you're starting your HTML page. We're going to have this HTML tag, and you'll notice how I just typed out HTML and hit tab. This is referred to as Emmet, or that was what the plugin used to be called. It's now native to Visual Studio. So with this tag, and I've completed the name, if I just hit, and you'll see we'll have it on here. So Emmet abbreviation, it's going to split out after hitting tab, it's going to print out the rest of the tag as we would want it. So you'll notice here that we have an opening tag, and then we have a closing tag. Most of HTML tags will work this way. What that means is that, hey, our content being anything that's between these two tags, and these tags are commonly referred to as elements. So anything between the HTML tags or elements is going to render as HTML markup. Now, there's some additional tags we need to set for a standard HTML page. We have our head tag. Our head tag is where a lot of metadata is going to be going. It's also where we're going to inject a lot of dependencies, and we're going to inject them in between these two tags. Right now, I don't want to worry about that too much. We'll come back to the head tag. There's one last tag that is standard amongst all HTML, and that's the body tag. So the body tag is where the majority, if not 100% of our content is going to go. The body is, hey, we are adding, this is where our content goes, this is where it lives. That means when we have a title or we have some text like hello world, it's going to go in the body tag. For what the user is going to see, we're going to work within the body. Now that's your general setup for as basic as you can get for a HTML page. Let's go ahead and dive a little bit deeper, and we'll talk about some items that you can add to the head right away. Hey guys, a little shout out to me and my new course, the 100 Algorithms Challenge, how to ace your next JavaScript coding interview. In here we go over 100 different algorithm solutions. There's about 7.5 to 8 hours of content, and we're just knocking them out. It's a whole lot of fun and a big challenge. I encourage you to take it on. You can help me out in the process. There's a coupon code in the description to get it for just $10, and you can help buy this cat a can of cat food, because he's starving. All right, that's going to be on your conscience. But no, seriously, check it out in the description below. All right, so let's show a couple of the items that'll go in the head tag here. But first, what I want you to do is, if you're new here, I highly recommend, new to Visual Studio, go and searching for this live server extension and installing it. Once you've installed it and you have it there, you'll see that we have this Go Live button at the bottom. We're going to go ahead and launch this. This is going to launch natively on port 5500. Right now you'll see that this is our HTML page. There's really nothing in it, but the cool part of it is, let's go ahead and put this on one screen. I'll put this on one screen. We now can develop side by side, and I happen to have 4 monitors, but you guys don't, but or you may only have 1 or 2. But what this does is, instead of us having to manually go and refresh our page every time when we add some content, like, we'll just say example and save, you'll notice that this is going to automatically go ahead and update our example so that we can see side by side as we're updating it. So that's the live server extension. I highly encourage you to use something like this. But let's give an example of what the title tag would do. So the title tag is actually, you ever wonder how do they actually name the title of a page? Well, in the bar here, it's with the title tag. So we'll just put title tag here, and you'll see now we save it. We are now able to change the name of the tabbed browser that we're currently on for this page. So that's an example of something that you can do in the head tag. So some other sort of metadata that you can add, and when I say metadata, what that's really referring to is content that isn't on the page, but more so how the page should work and react, right? So like so far, this tab title tag isn't really part of the page. So I would consider that metadata, but it's other things that we'll cover, more complex things in the head, such as content types, and don't worry about that right now. I want to go, this is an introduction video, but it's going to be a thorough introduction video. So anyhow, let's say we want to change the icon, fave icon on our page. The way that we could do that is with the link tag. Now the link tag doesn't only do that. You know, it also is a way to add a style sheet, and you know, we actually don't need this rel anymore. But let's say we wanted to add a fave icon, and we wanted to, I believe if we go, rel icon should do it. Sorry about that. Save that. We'll now have, you'll see how it changed to 360 here, up in here, up in her. You'll notice that we now have an icon here. That's just the icon from my YouTube channel, codingtutorials360.com. Shameless plug. No, but this is how one way that we can now add a icon to the page, and we're going to do it in the header, or in the head, excuse me, not the header. The header is a different thing. In the head. All right, so let's jump out of the head for just a second here and jump into the body where we want to actually render content, and we'll start with headings. Headings are from an H1, which is the largest, all the way down to an H6, which is the smallest. So this is our smallest, and this is our largest heading. And then we have everything in between. So you'll see here with our headings now, we have H1 to H6, and these are usually going to be used for a heading of a page, a heading of a section. One thing to consider is that this is a block level element, and what that basically means is you'll see when we hover over here, and we're getting into some more advanced stuff right now, and if you don't understand what I mean by block level and me opening the developer console, don't worry about it. But what this means is that it's going to take up the entire area, the entire horizontal area, when it's a block level element by default. That's why each one of these are on a different line. So you'll see that blue right there, and headings have a certain amount of padding or margin, and that's more about CSS. But what you need to understand is that headings are designed to take up an entire block, essentially the entire horizontal row, which is why they're all on separate lines. Let's say you don't want a heading for a page and you just want to output some content. Another block level element, meaning that's going to be on its own line, and we'll go ahead and comment this out. Comment all of this out except the smallest, and is a paragraph tag or a p tag. So these are paragraphs. This is our standard text that we want to go with here. So let's say I want to just put an introduction statement. Hi, my name is Dylan and I am a coding god. Right? Just a little confidence for you. You'll notice that, hey, this is a paragraph. It's actually bigger than the heading, right? We're using the smallest heading. So from a very semantic standpoint, what we would probably want is maybe like an H2. You know, you could play around with it, but you would say, you know what? It doesn't really make sense for the heading to be smaller for my introduction. And we save it, and now it's going to look a little bit better, right? But a paragraph is also a block level element. So if we had another paragraph, and here it said except when I am not, save it, you'll notice that these paragraphs are on a separate line as well because they are a block level element. All right, let's talk about how we might make a list, right? So we have our headings, we have our paragraphs, but there's, you know, a lot of other items that we can cover as well, such as lists. A list is something that has bullet points or may be numbered, and we'll showcase how to have an ordered list or an OL. So you'll notice that we have these OLs, and this, by default, nothing's going to change on this page because we need list items. Those are LI tags, and notice how it is nested within. We're going to do like that a little bit bigger. Nested within, and so maybe we'll do, you know, something about me. I am age 30, and you'll notice that it's, you know, 1 right there because the O stands for ordered. We'll do another LI here, and we'll do I weigh My weight is about 185, although maybe plus 5 pounds. I haven't weighed myself in a while. I feel like I've probably put on some weight. So 185. But you'll notice that we can keep doing this, and our content is going in between our list item element. Now, in this case, it doesn't make too much sense why we're doing 1 then 2. And if we wanted it to be a bulleted list, we could, and that's going to be the UL tag instead of the OL tag for unordered list. So we can do list items this way as well, which is a very important element in HTML. And oftentimes when you see a navigation, what you're really seeing is a styled list there that has been, used for that purpose. Now there are tags that aren't necessarily going to display content on the screen, but are going to affect how the content is. Now, let's give an example. Hi, my name is Dylan. Let's say we wanted actually to do a line break right there. We could throw a BR tag in here like so, and this is going to kick it down a line. Notice that there's still a gap. It's within the same element, but we're now breaking the line with our BR tag. Let's talk about some items, some elements in HTML that have a little bit more user interaction, such as a button. So a button, by default, when we save it here, it's just going to have this little box here, and the reason for it is we should probably give it some content, right? So let's say we go and say, tell, maybe this is a subscribe to my channel sort of button. Now we have this button that's on here that we can click. Now it doesn't do anything right now, and that's a little bit beyond the scope of this project, but there's some things that we haven't discussed, such as attributes or properties. Attributes is the better word to use. Attributes of HTML. So far everything we've had are just been static HTML stuff, except right here, I guess, where these rel icon, this is what's referred to as a property, and then we have its value, and the href here is a property as well. So button has a couple, and by a couple I mean like 10 different attributes that we can do. There's disabled, which is probably a more common one, where you'll notice that now this button's grayed out and it's not having that click, and we have disabled this button from being in use. And you're saying right now probably, well, why would you disable a button? Well, if you ever use a form submit and you're like, you need all the information, one way is that you're going to disable it till all that information's there, and then we'll enable it. And that involves some JavaScript and some complex HTML without doing it with JavaScript. But there's disabled, and then there's things like autofocus, where we're going to throw autofocus on here, and now that should have done it. So basically this should have, unless I set it up wrong, when the page loads, it's going to autofocus onto our button. There we go. Just in rephrase. So you see how that is already focused on there? That's why we have it selected. And we'll do it one more time. See how it's blue? Autofocus means when the page loads, jump immediately to this button. That's one of the properties of a button. There's a bunch more, and we'll go over some of them later on in the advanced section. Alright, so there's ways to modify text in native CSS, but there's also ways to modify it directly with HTML. So let's say we wanted to modify just this word Dylan. What we could do is we could wrap it in the strong element, and you'll notice that now it's bold, right? That's what the strong tags does. And there's also the M tag here, which is going to italicize what's within it, and you'll notice Coding God is now italicized. Another thing that exists is the B tag. The reason which is going to bold as well, but the B tag is sort of, it's not deprecated, but the strong HTML tag is more correct semantically. And the reason you would use it over it is there's some SEO stuff for any of this, but really your page needs to have readability, and when we're saying strong, we were putting strong emphasis on something, and that's the objective here. While it's not necessarily that we want it to be bold, it is bold, but we want it to say, look, this is something that is a strong statement, which is our objective. Alright, so although you're just getting started on your coding journey, a cool tag that exists is the code tag. And let's say I'm going to write some example JavaScript, and you don't have to know what this means, but const, today's date is equal to new date. So this is just in JavaScript. You'll notice how this is formatted slightly different, where it's not the same text, it's not the same font. This is because it's within the code bracket, and this will also tell any page reader that this is code of some type, and this is just generic JavaScript. Also, we haven't really talked about this, but notice how we've talked about block level elements. A button is not a block level element, and neither is the code tag, which makes it sort of an inline element, which means that it's going to just go to the right instead of on a new line. So let's say I felt like lying about my age because I'm self-conscious and shallow like that. So one tag that we could do that is, let's say we want to delete this like so and put a strike through it, and actually put, look, man, I'm 21 years old, I don't care what anybody says. So the del tag will actually do a strike through our text to quote unquote delete it. So that's another thing that we can use to affect the style of our text using HTML. Alright, so let's say you want to actually put a horizontal rule or a line on the page. Let's say we want to do it right here before our items. We do it with the HR tag, and you'll see here that we now have this line that goes across the entire width for the spot for the where it's at. They would define it as a thematic change in content. Really, you're separating something. You're just putting a line on the page, but that's what the horizontal rule does. So iframes are a little bit more of an advanced topic, but I think it's worth covering. So if you've ever wanted to, right-clicked on a YouTube video, for instance, and you click copy embed code, what this is going to give you, there is an embed tag, but it's really not used too often. What this is going to give you is, now let's go ahead and put another HR here, is an iframe. And you'll notice when we save that we have this very large, and let's go ahead and change some of the properties here to be, maybe the width is going to be 200, and then we'll get rid of the height. I think it should adjust accordingly. So what this is going to give you is this wonderful Dolon video. And what an iframe is it's actually injecting another web page into your own web page. And so there has some properties like, or attributes rather, like width and height and source, which is where we're getting this, and allow autoplay and script, all this other stuff, allow full screen. But you'll notice that if we go and actually take this, and this may be slightly different because we are going through YouTube, that it's going to take us to where the embed code is itself. But say we were to go to like, now some sites have ways of allowing you not to embed code into their application, but it doesn't just have to be videos that you want to embed. We can actually embed just other websites like so, and we'll take all this off. I don't think we need this. I might be wrong. But you'll notice that now it's actually embedding my mobile version of my website, right? And it's not the best experience, obviously, but you can see that we are going through my website. So an iframe is just that. It is embedding a website into another website. All right, so let's say you're trying to inject an image. So how might we do something like that? Well, you can use the img tag, and you'll notice that we have a source attribute here. And I'm going to just paste some stuff in from Facebook that I have, and that's a little bit big, so we can use the width attribute to say, I don't know, width equal to 25%, and you'll notice it's about 25% on the side, and we get this beautiful picture of my boy Tito on here on my desk. So what's this alt attribute? So you'll notice when I hover over here, nothing is really showing. This alt text stands for alternative text, and so this is going to make it for screen readers. This is going to make it to add context, and it's also going to make it when an image fails to load, something's going to show. So we'll just put Tito the Great on here, and now when we hover over, it's not showing up. Oh, I'm getting something slightly confused. But let's save that. You'll notice that we now get Tito in our text here for this broken image, right? Our image path is broken. Another thing to consider is, say we were to gut this out it would actually have no text on it as well. I think we can get rid of this. There we go. So that width of 25% was breaking the name off when we had Tito the Great in there, which was part of the problem. So we hard-coded a width on there. You'll notice that when it's empty and it doesn't have a hard-coded width, the broken image actually will disappear as well. So that's how you inject images. It's a little bit more, it can get very complex about styling these, but that's more of a CSS item. But, you know, 25%, you know, guys don't get to see my cute cat. There we go, 50%. It looks very happy to be on camera. Yeah, so that's how we inject images. So how do we link to other pages, right? So far we've been working on one page here. We've covered quite a bit. Well, we can use what's called an anchor tag or an A tag, and anything we put in here, go to my channel, anything we put in here, such as the href attribute, is where we're going to go. And so we're going to do something like www.youtube.com/coding tutorials 360. We save, and you'll see we have this go to my channel, which is also an inline element, which is why it's, as images are, which is why they pushed over and not are on the same line. And so when we click it, it's going to automatically go and take us to my current page. And I'm live streaming as I do this, so that's why you see those sorts of things. But there's a couple other properties that we may want to talk about, where we have target is equal to blank. This will open up the web page in a brand new window, like so. And so if you don't want to redirect, it will open it up in a new tab. So that's the target attribute. Now you can do this with more than just text. So let's say you wanted to, it's basically anything that you wrap this on around. So let's say we wanted our image here to go and be our router. We don't have to have text. And you'll notice this hand icon, it's hovering over that to indicate that it can be clicked. That will take us to a new page as well. So it's not just text, we can do images, we can do anything, as long as we wrap it in our anchor tag, our A tag. So remember I told you not everything is going, like we're providing context for things. So the delete here is kind of providing context. There's also an insert, right? So after we deleted this 30, we can insert values. That doesn't mean that we're actually dynamically changing the code. All it means is that when we're underlining this, we're saying, hey, we inserted this value at a later date. It's more of a code readability thing here. It's like, hey, the strike through is delete. Here we're saying then we inserted this value. You don't really need to do either, but it makes it more readable, the intent of the author, which is the most important in my opinion. We also have the ability to highlight text, which is something that is somewhat important. So we want to use the mark tag for that. So on age here, oops, let's go ahead and save that. You'll see now that we're going to highlight the text that we have it wrapped around when we apply the mark element. So the pretag isn't something that's used too often, but let's say you wanted to have except when I am not on different lines, right? Like this, you might be expecting this to actually format in that way, but the HTML only sort of counts one white space and thinks, no, this is probably not what you want. But if we were to change this paragraph tag, or we were to wrap this in a pre-tag, what this is going to say is, yo, I actually want my text rendered out this way. Please keep it that way. And it's also going to change it, right? It's going to slightly change the formatting, but you'll notice now that we're going to pre-render this. And this is something I've used very seldomly, but it does exist. I've used it when I wanted to showcase the nesting of a JSON in the web page for an audit log. That's about the only time I've used it, but it's something to be aware of. So let's say we wanted to make something a subscript or a superscript, like you know how in variables we might have 4 to the second power. We wanted to do something like that. Let's say that's what we wanted to do, where we had IQ or something, and this was 900 9,000. It's over 9,000, right? And we wanted to make it to the second power, 9,000 squared. How might we get that to be a superscript? Well, we can use the sup keyword like so, and that would make it a superscript, and we could use it there. And we could, if we wanted to make this +5 a subscript, we can use the sub tag to do that as well. That would make it a little bit lower and a little bit smaller to be a subscript. Alright, so let's say we wanted to underline some text, right? Like the word wait. We can do that with the U tag. So now we have the ability to underline text. Alright, so we've covered quite a bit. We've covered how to add images, anchor tags, paragraphs, headings, the head section. I'm going to jump in at iframes, buttons. I'm going to jump into a different direction now and talk about tables. So we're going to start by just commenting out all this code. Oh man, are they really going to make me do it like this? So we're going to comment out all the code real quick. The reason for this is I just want the whole page to showcase the table that we're going to be working with now. So we have a blank page once again. Alright, so tables are used when you need content to render in a very specific way. Typically most developers will tell you to try to avoid use tables, but I think it's worth mentioning because you will have to use them. So you'll start off with this table tag where we're going to nest our table. And if you've ever seen a table, there's a header of a table, there's a body, and sometimes there's a footer. So let's start with the T head, which is how we're going to define our header. Like so. So now we have our table container, which is our main one. Then we have our table head, which is for the head of the table. Now from here we have a TR, which stands for table row, which you'll still see that nothing is displaying, right? Because we haven't actually added any data. This is still all set up. So a table row means that it's going to go horizontally. And now we have a TH tag, which is going to actually be a header for it. So let's say this is a, I don't know, most of you are probably students, so we'll have a name, table head, and we'll save it. So right now we have a single column to go with our table head, and then we'll have another TH here, and then we'll have a GPA, right? So now we have two columns in our head, which these are going to be, you notice by default they're bold because this is a heading. It makes sense, right? Now what we can do next is we can go ahead and set up what's called the table body, which will be the bulk of the data, where we're going to put our data. So we can do that with a T body tag, like so, and then we'll do another T table row because each row is going left to right in our body, and we'll have, instead of a TH tag, we'll have a TD for table data. This will say first name is Dylan. And we'll say Dylan has a modest 2.7 GPA. Very modest 2.7 GPA. And then we'll have a Dolan, which will have some data for Dolan. And Dolan, from what he tells me, had a 6.2 GPA. And actually, we can go ahead and remove the GPA because we have our table heading, right? It's telling us what's going on here, and you can see now we have this table format going on. So that's our header, that's our body, and we might as well give it some attributes here where let's say I'm just gonna put some styles on this so that we can see it. So we haven't talked about the inline style tag yet. We'll cover that more in a CSS related video. But our style tag here, we're just going to add a border of 1px solid black around the table. We don't need that there either. And you'll see now we have a border around the table, and we're going to do the same thing for the head. And we'll make this maybe green. I might even get rid of. Oh, do I need to put it on the? I might need to put it on here, on the table row. Huh? I wonder why it's not displaying. I might have to look into that a little bit more. I was expecting that to work. I'm not quite sure why it didn't. Oh. Anyhow, but we have our table here, and let's do this on the body here. Now, if this doesn't work, I might have to go and... Oh, you know why? We don't put it on here. We put it on the TDs and the THs. That's why. You know what? Let's cover the style tag real quick. So you should never do style tags like this. And we'll talk about how to inject a style sheet coming up. But we can, instead of having to copy our logic here, what we want is on the table and comma on the table head and on the table data, we want to just apply a border exactly like this. And now we can remove this, and it's going to apply it to all table elements, all table heads, and all table data. And there we go. So now we can see our table elements much cleaner and much faster way. So let's go ahead and showcase the table footer now as well. At this point in time, you've probably figured out what T-footer might be called. T-foot. And in here, we are going to have a table row, and then we're going to have a table data here. There's no T8, TF side. It's kind of strange. Everything should either be a TD, in my opinion, then why just have these table headers? But hey, I didn't write this crap. So table head. So what might our footer have? It might have total number of people, and we'll just put 2 people, right? And then we might also have, you know, average GPA or something like that. And what is that? 8.9 divided by 2. It's going to be like 4.45. Something like that. So that might be our footer. And by default, you notice there's nothing really showcasing that it's different. So we would have to style that on our own. It's more about showcasing semantically that it would come down the road. And I believe, let me just test something real quick. So although this is bad practice, just something to be aware. You notice how even though I put the T footer before the T body, it's still rendered as the last one because it's the footer tag. So that's something to keep in mind, but don't ever do that. That's just bad convention. But if you're ever trying to figure out why, that's why. So I've been kind of doing it, and I haven't explained to you how to comment code out. So let's say we want to comment something out because we're running tests or something. By default in Visual Studio Code, I'll hold Control and then / and it will comment it out. So what our comment is it's this caret. The start of the comment is the caret exclamation dash dash, and then the end of the comment is dash dash caret, and everything in between there is going to be commented out. And of course, you could Control Z to put it back in there. Typically, it is really bad convention to just leave commented code for a production level application. So keep that in mind, that this is really just there for you to test and showcase maybe some detail here or there, but that's about it. So one thing we didn't talk about is the Doctype tag. Now, you don't really need to worry about the Doctype tag, but you're going to see it and you're going to ask what it is. So the very first thing in any HTML document will typically be Doctype, and it's not going to have a closing tag, and you'll see it followed by HTML. And so what this is telling the browser is that this is an HTML5 document. So, you know, everything we've been looking at has been HTML. I haven't really put emphasis on HTML5 and HTML4 and everything else. You really don't need to worry about that. Every web page in today's modern world will be an HTML5 page, and the browser is expecting it to work that way. But before it was that way, you typically would say, hey, we're using HTML5 up in here. We ain't working with that bootleg 4 or 3. And that's what this Doctype tag is really saying. There's ways for us with the Doctype tag to, instead of this saying, hey, expect this to be a HTML document, we are expecting it to be an XHTML document, or we're expecting it to be an HTML4 document. So if you see that, that's what that's doing. You don't really need to worry about it. In fact, pretty much every web browser will render it as HTML5 unless told otherwise. All right, let's say you want to put a audio file on your page to showcase, you know, what's how to, just something that you want to play. We can do that with the audio tag. And in here, so audio is kind of a interesting thing, and you don't really see too many audios, but you can put a source directly on it. And if we put controls and save, you'll see that we have this tag playing here. Now, so controls gives us the ability to visualize it, and depending on the website, some may have it blocked, but there's also a, I believe it's called autoplay attribute. It's been a while since I've taught, autoplay. So we can put autoplay here on our item and we save it. Might be a little hard to see. Let me turn it up so you guys can hear that. So it's going on in the background, which is a really obnoxious way to get people never to come to your site again. So that's one way that you can do that. So controls will add controls to it. Another thing that to keep in mind is that you might not see the source being set to where that file is, and instead nested within our audio you might see things like the source tag, and this will be the same for the video, /source, and in /sort. Why does it keep thinking we don't have an audio tag? It's right there, homie. /source, and in our source what we might have here is a source where we're going to pass this in, and we're going to say the type is equal to, I believe in this it's audio /ogg, right? That's our file type. And that will work as well, just fine. But the reason that you would do it like this is because, say we're not everyone's computer. Some people are using bootleg browsers like IE, and some people are using just ancient computers. They may not have access to OGG files or something like that, but let's say this was an MP4. We could then have this backup MP4 type, and then if this one failed, it would then run this one. And then we could also, let's say that this file didn't exist, right? We're just going to break some stuff and break some stuff. We could then display a message that says, your browser is bootleg. Get a better one. Get a better one, please. It is 2018. Forgot. It is 2018. And save it. And now when it fails, I guess because we can play the files, this will play. But let's say we took out the sources and we saved it. It's not displaying. Anyhow, typically if those files don't exist, you'll be able to see it's when your browser doesn't support the audio element, rather, or if both of these fail. I guess maybe it's just for when the audio element doesn't support. So if you're using like an ancient browser, this will display when this element here just doesn't exist in their browser type, which, unless you're using like IE8, IE9, something like that, which I feel bad for you, but if you are, then you're going to have some issues and you're going to need to display that message. Alright, so we talked about audio. Let's go ahead and give an example about video. Video works pretty much identically to how audio works, where we can provide a source for something, and let's give a width here of, put controls on here as well. So we'll say controls, and now we'll have this player here. Now I grabbed a link off YouTube, so they may not like me having it set like this, and I bet that's what's going on here. But let's go ahead and actually just throw in a video link from my own YouTube page, or my own computer. Properties, give me the path. So where's the path? Give me the path. Let's see here. So I learned something. I'm having trouble using the source attribute directly on the video. I thought that would work. Let's go ahead and try something slightly different. So as we kind of explained with the controls, it's going to add controls to the video. That's going to be identical, and we're going to add the source here with the source equal to that, which is a local recording. And then of course we're going to need to close that as well with our tag. So let's go ahead and close that /source. Let's go and save it now. And we're going to give it a type real quick. We're going to set the type equal to video/mp4. Let's see if that fixes it. So we're still having issues here, huh? So traditionally, the videos HTML5 video player has kind of been a pain to work with, especially when it comes to mobile. So I'm not quite sure what's going on here, but I'd have to investigate a little bit more. But you would pass in the source, and then you'd have your video type, and then you'd have your backup source, which would be exactly like the we don't need a closing source tag, whoopsies. But we'd have our backup source as well. All right, so far we've been dealing with elements that really have little to no user interaction. Let's go and talk about elements that do, and that would be things that like input boxes. So to define an input is what's called a self-closing tag, similar to the BR tag, where it is you don't need a slash. Sometimes you'll see inputs with slashes on the end, and it's only in one tag. But you'll notice that there's not another tag that goes along with it. You also notice that we have this type attribute of text, which is adding a text input. So, we do something like this where we're assigning that. There's quite a few. And by default, if you don't assign a type, it's going to be a text dropdown. I would say it's probably better convention to put the type in there. But there's quite a few types for our inputs that we can talk about. All right, so earlier we showed you just about the text box, but there are a ton of different input types. So you can see here we have a button, we have a checkbox, we have a color picker, we have a date picker, we have a date time picker, we have a email type, we have a file type, attach a file, we have a an image type, don't really worry about that one. In here, which one's this? Here's another month type, and then we have a number type, then we have a password type, a radio button type, a range type, a reset button type, which is for forms, for resetting values. We have a search type, a submit button type, a telephone type, which really, so the telephone, like the password, the email, that's all for like providing context, as well as being able to there's additional attributes you can provide, but they're all going to look very similar to a phone number, for instance, or to an input. We have a URL type, and then we have a week type, and then we have a time type of just the time. So the biggest ones to keep in mind, because I just wanted to expose to you all of the different types of inputs, and there's probably a few I even left off here and that are being added as we go by, is so I would say let's get rid of these. Email, we can leave file on there. Hidden, there's also a hidden type. Get rid of the number, and then we have a radio. Okay. So these are sort of the biggest types that you have to be familiar with. I will say that the input type button is, for the most part, replaced with a button of type equal to button. And remember those other, and we'll just put some value in here, EX. And remember the reset and submit, those are also going to be button types as well, of type reset. Excuse me, so we'd have like reset or submit here. But these are the input types you have to know. So let's talk a little bit about, because I think a text box is pretty familiar at this point. You're going to put text in here. And then a file type makes sense, right? We're going to attach a file of some sort. A date time makes sense. And then we have a number range here where we're putting numbers, we're upping numbers, all that sort of stuff. So let's talk a little bit about checkboxes and radio boxes, because they're slightly different. All right, before we go ahead and do a checkbox example, let's clear this out real quick. And what I want to introduce you to is what is the field set and legend tag. So field set really refers to grouping something together. Right now we don't really have anything in our field set, but you'll see that we have this box here. And then we're going to add a legend here. and we'll call this checkbox example. Now that we've done that, you'll see that it's going to throw it in here, excuse me, which is kind of cool. All right, so the point of a field set is to group form elements. Let's give an example of our checkbox like so. How might we have a checkbox? So this is going to be of type checkbox. And, you know, a checkbox is just there that doesn't have anything going with it. Really isn't all that useful. So what you're typically going to do is apply a label. And we haven't talked about labels. And you know what? Let's actually, I think a label will look a little bit cleaner if we use an example of an input box before we move forward. So typically with labels, there's a couple things to keep in mind. This is supposed to give you an idea of what the input box is supposed to do. So we'll have a label here, and we'll just say input example. And you'll notice that it's going to automatically be, they're both inline elements, so it's going to be automatically to the left. Now, one thing to keep in mind is this for tag is really saying, what is this label for? And so we'll say text example. And that's going to reference an ID attribute that we're going to throw on our input. So we haven't talked about CSS in this video, but IDs are essentially unique selectors. That means, hey, I can target this by an ID, an identification number, right? And when we take our label and apply it, and we say for text example, and we give it an ID text example, one thing that happens is when we click on the label, it will automatically focus on our input. Now we could click here, but that we're making that association. So labels are there to describe inputs. And also, we didn't talk about the placeholder attribute when it came to input types. So you know, if you're using a text area, or you're saying you're using a placeholder, the value or a input of type text, you can put a placeholder that will have some default text. Like maybe we want to put first name, you know, last name in here, just to give them an idea of what to put in. Or like it's a you know, let's say it's a, we want in this input box our birthday. So we'll do month dash day or something give them a hint about it. And you'll notice how we have this grayed out text, and then we put something in here like 10 space 25. But you can provide hints for your form inputs as well. But let's jump back into the checkbox example real quick. All right, so let's go ahead and create a couple items here, a couple inputs, and we're going to delete our content here. And we're going to do input of type checkbox. And we're not going to worry about the name and ID just quite yet. And so we're going to have checkbox, and we're going to have another checkbox, and we're going to have another checkbox like so. And they're all going to be in line. And we want to go ahead and create a label. Now, you'll notice that in this instance, I'm creating the label after the input checkbox. It's just because I want it to be on the right. But I think that probably makes more sense. It looks better. And we'll worry about the for in a second. So we'll say example 1. And we can go ahead and just bring this down the line. And we'll do the same thing here. And that will be example 2 and example 3. So a checkbox gives us the ability to select multiple values in our input type. And this is pretty nice. You know, we never know how many. These are true or false values, right? So this is true or false, essentially. Now we can actually assign a value to our input to say what it is that we want to communicate. So let's use our for, and we'll give this an ID here, and we'll set this, for our for, we'll have a value here, and we'll say, you know, example 1. Typically IDs will always be lowercase, by the way. So let's go ahead and, you know, do good convention. So this will be example 1, and we'll still have this nice little effect where you'll see when I click on the label, that works, and you'll notice when I click on the label example 2, it doesn't, right? Because we haven't assigned that value. So it saves us a little bit of time there. Now, if you're dealing with traditional forms submits, and I kind of think that's beyond the scope of a basic HTML introduction. I think when you're getting into form submits, what you're really getting into is sort of a JavaScript area. So we're not going to worry about traditional forms. But here, we are going to set a value, so equal to, I don't know, we can set a value to example 1. And now in our form, when this is selected, it's going to not only have it selected, but it's going to set it to be example 1. Now we can also set a default value. Say you want a value checked by default when the page loads. We can put this checked keyword on our page, so when it loads, you'll notice it's selected by default. One of the items that sometimes people kind of think are similar to checkboxes are radio boxes. So what I want to do here is I want to change these checkboxes, and I guess we'll change the legend here to radio. Radios. We're going to change our type here to a radio type. And now we'll have 3 radio buttons, which right now you'll notice that we're selecting all 3. And radio buttons are used to say, hey, I only want one item to be selected out of these 3, right? That's not how it's currently working. Well, what we can do, and this goes into, and let's go, goes into the traditional sort of, and you'll notice, by the way, that that checked value works in radio as well, right? So this is going to be checked by default. So we'll take that off for now. But what we're going to do is we're going to take the name property, which is used in traditional form submits, but it's also used here to create sort of an association of values, right? And so here we'll do a radio EX. And this name property is going to be the same for all the radios. And this is how they're going to be grouped. This is how we're going to tell the other radio buttons, look, we can only have one value selected here and no more, right? And so we'll be jumping between here. And this is creating that group and that association. Now, again, you're going to want to put a value attribute on here. We might say, hey, EX1 is the value when this one's selected. In our other radio, we'll go ahead and do something like EX2 is the value when this is selected, and EX3 is the value when this is selected. Now, one thing that people may be tempted for you to do is, or you may see, is that, you know, they might do something like this where they will they'll have a label and then they'll wrap some sort of input in it. This is people who are being lazy and don't want to set up the for and the ID values. This is bad. I consider this bad semantically when we're writing HTML. So please don't wrap your inputs with labels. That's not how it should be done, in my opinion. This is sort of a hack. But I wanted to mention that because you'll probably see that in some documentation. Not documentation, but you'll see it in some projects, you know, that if you're looking through some code on GitHub. All right, another item that we can talk about when it comes to inputs is we can talk about text areas. Very similar to input type text, except a larger area. Think of it as a more of a comment sort of block. Nope. And this does have an opening and a closing tag. And so right now you'll see when we save it, it has a amount of rows and amount of columns, so you can set up the default text areas also in the bottom right hand corner and give us the ability to drag and drop whatever it is that we want. You don't really need these values in here unless you want it to be a certain size. A text area by default, I believe, is like a, yeah, here's it. So here's the default, it's a 2-1 or something like that. But those rows and columns values, that would be how you would set up the exact size that you would want it to be. So 2 major things that we haven't talked about are divs and spans, which are kind of thrown in the same category, and then also the semantic HTML element containers. Let's talk about divs and spans first. So remember we were talking about block level elements, and then we'll give, and in here we'll just put an example of a test. So a div is a block level container, and what that means is that when we see this div, see how it's going across even though all we have is some generic text? We're creating a block level container, and if we were to have another div here with test 2, test 1, you notice that it's going to be on different lines because they are block level elements. You know, it's not for the div. So sometimes you may need to create containers to manipulate the HTML of a section. Now, there are also containers called spans, which are inline containers. And so we don't always have all the tools we need to manipulate things. So maybe we want a span here where we can do test 1. And this is called this will be an inline container, which essentially means, and you'll notice how it's wrapped around here, that's only going to take up as much stuff as it needs, right? That's where our span goes. And if we were to have another span here, and we call this test 1.1, you notice that it's going to be in line as well. This is a way that we can create a container that's not necessarily going to change the way that the code or the HTML markup is rendered. But here we can have these containers. Why might we have some stuff like that? Well, we might want to change the text color. We might want to do something like that. We might want to float it to left and apply CSS. It really just depends. So divs and spans are one of the... getting comfortable with divs is a very big deal. A lot of times people get sort of overwhelmed because they don't look like they do too much on the surface other than organize your code, but they do so much more than that once you dive into it. Now, we had talked a little bit about, I said there's another thing I want to discuss, which was the HTML semantic markup. And what that basically means is in the past, when we wanted to have a navigation, we would have a div and we would give it our navigation class here. Navigation class. And that would be our navigation. And we'd have navigation items in there. In 2018, we want our code to be readable and maintainable. And one thing that makes that much nicer are the HTML5 semantic elements. All right, so we talked about nav. Nav is a HTML semantic element. So now we're saying, hey, this is our navigation right here. And that's really helpful. And, you know, we'll put some, I'm not going to put any content in here. The reason you use these elements is really to give a better definition. So instead of applying a class or an ID of navigation, we can use a nav tag. Instead of using the header class, we can actually just have our header section. We can also, of course, have a footer section where we're going to do some stuff. You know, then there's the main part of the application, right? So the header and the footer probably in the nav, those things are probably never going to change. But within main, we're going to have the bulk of our content render within here, right? So all this stuff's going to be within the body, but main is going to be that stuff that's going to be changing from page to page to page, right? So there's a couple others as well. So within your main, some other things to mention is you might have a section where this is going to have some, like an H1, and this will be like your title, and then a paragraph, right? And this would be like a description or something like that. So you have the sections to go along with it, and then you of course have a couple more that are worth mentioning, which are articles. And these again are just containers that provide a little bit more detail, a little bit more description as to what you're doing. So instead of section, maybe it's more appropriate to use the article tag, where it's an article. And you can read up a little bit on each one of these, because I am going through this a little bit fast for most beginners. But at the end of the day, these are just containers to provide a little bit more detail. Let's do one last one here, which is the figure container. So let's say you have like a graph or an image. You might have an image in here and say something. And then this one actually has a fig caption, which would just be, guess it doesn't know that one, so fig caption, and in here this would be like, you know, example text, you know, photo description, and you would have that's essentially your figure. We don't have any image in there, so that's not why it didn't render. But you then get this details, like here's a, you know, maybe we have a chart that's being injected in here, and that's our figure. So those are the HTML5, the main HTML5 semantic elements. And what you really need to take away from it is that there are, you know, you're still going to have to use divs, you're still going to have to use spans, but these are to provide readability for what this section is and how they work. And it's to add some, because I mean most pages, right, are going to have a navigation, most are going to have a header, a main part of the document, and a footer. And so you have some items here to understand a little bit better how the web page is flowing and what each section does. Now the only HTML5 semantic element that really adds additional functionality is the details one. Now I will, you know, probably this early on into your HTML journey, you're not going to be too worried about browser compatibility, but Edge does not have functionality for this yet. So details And you'll see there that it doesn't even know what it is. So details is a cool little thing where we essentially creates like a show and hide functionality. And so we can have our summary tag, which doesn't even know what that is either. So summary, let's say we have about me, right? And you have this button, and you'll notice we click it, open it, click it, open it, nothing's showing. But the summary is what's going to show here, and then we can have, you know, a paragraph tag or something like that. Hi, my name is Dylan. Save that. And you'll notice it's closed by default, but when we click this button, it's a show and hide, show and hide, show and hide. It's pretty cool, right? And it's one of the newer items that has been added to HTML5 in recent times. And you can, if you go on details, you can add the open so that when it loads, it's open. And you could, of course, just take it off, or you can put closed on here. That will close it as well, but by default, it's closed. So that's another cool addition to HTML. So Jason Martinez says, hey man, any advice for finding a front-end dev job in Tampa while I live out of state? So my first piece of advice is always make sure that you have taken care of all the things that I typically mention all the time. Make sure you have a good GitHub, portfolio site, LinkedIn, resume. All right, and hopefully you have a side project you're working on. So just those are the standards. But specifically to this question, the first thing I would do is I'd actually change my location on LinkedIn to the city that I'm looking to move to. On my resume, I would update it saying looking to relocate, because a lot of times what will happen is recruiters will only reach out to you if you're in that city. And hey Tito, and when they see your resume, if it doesn't have the same city, they'll oftentimes throw it out because they think you applied accidentally or something like that. So I would start there, and I would also consider saying, hey, do you only want to live in Tampa? Is that something that is truly the only possibility? Or are you willing to, if you live out of state, are you willing to live in other locations as well? And consider that, especially when you're just getting started. It's about being prepared and having the right skills, but it's also a numbers game, so consider that. Say bye, Tito. Hey guys, thanks for watching the video. Hope you subscribed and hit that notification bell. Check out my latest course, the 100 Algorithms Challenge, where we go through 100 different algorithms in JavaScript and TypeScript so that you can ace your next JavaScript coding interview. You can get it in the description for just $9.99. Check it out. See you next time. Thanks for watching.